Hello and welcome to Left of the Projector. I'm your host, Evan, back again with another film discussion from the left. You can follow the show on all platforms at leftoftheprojector.com. This week on the show, we are discussing the Guillermo del Toro film, The Devil's Backbone, released in 2001 and one of the director's early works and loosely part of a trilogy, although I guess it's a similar vibe and, the Spain being part of the background, and that being Cronos and Pan's Labyrinth, along with The Devil's Backbone. The film was not a success in the box office, but that says nothing about the film's quality, just making $6.5 million on a $4.5 million budget. This week to discuss, I have Olivia, the host and creator of the YouTube channel You Have Been Watching Films. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Of course. And I guess before we jump in, if you wanted to tell everyone about your YouTube channel, which I'll link in the notes, and just a little bit about it. And if you have anything else you wanted to tell people where they can find you.
It's a channel where each week I do a video on a specific film. Each month is usually a specific theme. I try and focus on unusual choices, a mix of like cult, underground, art house, or experimental. Sometimes I'll put in some popular choices every now and again. Most of the decisions are made by my Patreon supporters, but hopefully each month there's something new that people might not be aware of, or I can bring a thoughtful perspective towards the film. I usually strive for the quite leftist, feminist perspective. More recently this year, I've been trying to diversify the content. So if you've not seen some of the films I'm specifically talking about, I'm doing broader video discussions. I've started talking about lost films or great film artwork. One of the main things I'm working towards as we get close towards the end of the year is a ranking of my favourite films of 2024. I'm hoping that if you find the video essay format for films you might not be aware of a bit daunting, hopefully there's other things that'll be appealing to you too.
Awesome. Yeah. The one that I watched recently, when I was in college, the first class I took was a film. It was called Film and Reality, and we watched a bunch of movies that I hadn't been exposed to. One of them was Kids, and you had done a video about that. And it had been a long time. I must have written a pen. It had been a long time since I had revisited that one, and it always, it always feels like very haunting.
It was a film I was reluctant to cover because it's the Patreon supporters who pick the theme or suggest film. Kids was included, and I remember seeing it like 10 years before and thinking, oh my god, not this film. I'm really glad I went through it again, because I'd remembered how shocking it was, but rewatching it I thought, this film is doing quite a lot to try and destigmatize ignorant notions of HIV and AIDS infections during the peak of that crisis. The film's proposing this concept on consent as well, way before a lot of other films were too. I just felt like I had a new appreciation for it, even though I don't necessarily like the film. I can admire what it's going for.
Yeah, I hadn't considered it from that, like, as a, to dispel myths as opposed to just kind of being like shocking for shocking value. I mean, the first time I watched it, I was probably 19 years old, 18 years old, maybe for someone that young. But yeah, that was an interesting one. But yeah, so I guess to talk about, before we even talk about the film, sometimes I like to do kind of little, I don't know, I guess you could call them little icebreakers, but since it's the Halloween season, that you would recommend. It can be something, it doesn't have to be something, popular necessarily, even something less popular that people might not know about.
So the latest horror film I watched, outside of rewatching the Alien franchise, which still, even like the later entries when the quality sort of dips, there's still quite a lot of fun to be had with them. But the one that I watched most recently was Onibaba, the Kenato Shindo film. And it was one of those ones I'd seen years ago, but I didn't really remember much outside of the distinct demon mask. Rewatching it, you sort of feel how sweaty and dirty it all feels. I would say it's a horror film, not just because of the supernatural element, but because the trio of characters are really vicious, malevolent, selfish. In a way, it's partly because they're trying to survive at the edge of this war that's so distant we don't even really know if it's happening. But also the ease they're willing to try and manipulate each other to get what they want. So it's not just survival. I think they're just quite cruel characters. The film ends up
Mm.
becoming this karmic punishment for them. And it feels like a cautionary warning for viewers to not be like these characters unless we want to face some otherworldly comeuppance, you know? Uh,
Yeah.
I think it's really quite chilling. And after a while, it's quite disorienting as well, because when they're going between two huts, there's one character called Kichi, and he's a scoundrel and trying to find ways to sleep with the daughter-in-law of another hut. And every time they kind of go between huts later in the film, it transitions between day and night within seconds. It's almost like the film's playing with this whole metaphysical idea of time. Like, these people aren't really in a very literal space. It's an unusual one, and the more I think about it, the more I get obsessed with it.
I haven't seen that one. That sounds very
Oh, it's
interesting.
wonderful. It's beautiful to look at as well, like the way the lighting, the shadows. It's just moody, it's sweaty, and it's just wonderful.
One that I saw that you had reviewed recently on Letterboxd that I hadn't seen. I think I watched it for the first time last year and really enjoyed it. For anyone who hasn't seen A Bay of Blood,
Mm.
I think it's worth a watch. It's definitely a very, I don't know. Yeah, I would just recommend that one. It's sort of one of those really very gory for almost to a crazy. And I think I read something about the how much fake blood was used in it, and as true to the name of Bay of the Blood, you can probably go look at it
Mm.
and see what it would be like. But I would say that I haven't watched it recently, but I think I'm going to rewatch it
Yeah,
again.
I think Nat is my first Mario Bava film now. I hadn't had a chance to watch his films before. I've got another podcast later in the week where we're talking about Giallo films. So Mario Bava's been a bit of preparation. It's been exciting for me to finally get a chance to watch these films because some are quite hard to get here in the UK. I've not had much opportunity to sit down and watch them. So Bay of Blood was exciting, quite disorienting as well, quite
Yes.
hard to keep track of what's actually going on.
That was the first Mario Bava film. I think it's the only one I've seen. It's hard to even get that one. I think maybe because it's more popular amongst people looking to watch these films. Those are some good ones. I had another question on here. This is more, I guess you would say, of I don't know what the question would be, but a friend on another podcast, Concessions, who's been on this one a few times, they were just rewatching the entire Friday the 13th series. They had never seen
Mm.
any of them, I think, except maybe the first one. It came up to a discussion with some of my friends on what the best franchise, in quotation marks, horror series. And it's kind of, looking at some of the big ones, but I'm wondering if there's any of the main franchise horror kind of, I guess you could call them somewhat commercial ones, churn out
Yeah.
sequels that you enjoy or that you're, have a fondness for.
I've always had nostalgia for Nightmare on Elm Street. I got into those
Mm.
quite young, actually. I think I got the box set when I was 12. Clearly too young to be watching films like that, but even the sillier ones I've grown to have a soft spot for because some of the kills are really unique. Like, there's clearly I imagine the writers must have been competing against each other to come up with the more outlandish kills because, like, one of them, someone gets transformed into a motorbike, and then there's another one where they want to be a comic book hero who defeats Freddy and then dies within their own comic. These are weird and just delightful.
Yeah, that one might have. I haven't seen those in a while. But I only remember the first two. And so for me, I also saw these movies at a way too young age, at like 11 or 12. I used to like the Halloween
Mm,
just because of the first couple being really good, and then over the recent years and revisiting a lot of the Friday the 13th movies, I find them to be they're all again very silly and campy, and it's just you kind of have to take them for what they are. But I find them as kind of like just a good film to, or not maybe a good film, but just a fun film to watch. I watched the fourth one a couple nights ago, and yeah, they're just fun, silly,
yeah.
and yeah, I would say those would be, amongst those as far as kind of
I've
the
never
silly.
seen Friday the 13th, but Halloween, the one I saw last was Halloween 3. It's had this sort of reassessment where people are like, actually, this is really good. I thought, I'll give it a shot. And I sort of, I really did enjoy it. It caught me off guard because I only knew it by it being the Halloween film without Michael Myers. So I have no other idea of what to expect going into it. And there's all this stuff about corporate greed and chasing social trends. It's like, this is good satire.
I know. It's funny you mentioned Halloween 3. I have an episode that I haven't made yet, I
Yeah.
think on Halloween. Like you said, originally Halloween was supposed to be an anthology
Mm,
series, is what I understand it. And so each one was supposed to have a different, after the second one, they decided to get rid of Michael Myers and have other things. And then people said, well, we would actually rather have Michael Myers. And I think that one also did very poorly in the box office.
mm.
So they brought him back and just had another,
I would have loved
10
to
or
have known.
11 mils.
I would have loved to have known some of the different ideas they wanted to do, like straying away from Michael Myers. If they wanted it as an anthology, they must have had different concepts for later installments surrounding Halloween as a holiday rather than just the same killer.
I wonder, maybe when I do some research for that one, I'll uncover some, because I'm sure someone had said I had some other ideas about it. I also hadn't heard good things about that when I was younger. Like, oh, that one's a terrible one. Michael Myers isn't in it. And
Mm,
then I watched. Actually, maybe I was too young for the social commentary when I was,
yeah.
15. But watching it now, it quite has a lot of interesting notes to it. But I guess speaking of kind of a movie that has a lot of political and other social commentary and other things in it, is the film we're discussing today, the Del Toro film Devil's Backbone. And I guess before we talk about some of the themes and elements of the movie, I'm wondering, because I saw you also rewatched it, and wondering just maybe your overall impressions, like as a, in his, his catalog of films, maybe where it lands for you, and anything else you want to share just before we dive in.
Devil's Backbone, I think, like, personally speaking, it's never been quite my favorite Del Toro film. I think I can't even remember when I first saw it. I remember hearing people saying, oh, it's chilling, it's frightening, and I think teenage me probably expected it to be scarier than it is. But I think I must have been initially quite disappointed. And over time, as I've kind of grown more fond of like this subtler chills of ghost stories from like the Victorian era, and I'm reading more horror or watching older horror films from the 40s. I'm retraining myself to kind of appreciate the quieter chills and atmosphere, and I suppose ghosts less as a vehicle for frights and more as an extension of a character or a character within itself. As I've rewatched it, Devil's Backbone most recently, I'm sort of thinking there's some like literary allusions I'm picking up on. So the orphanage, I'm thinking, oh, this is sort of reminding me of that old girls' school in Jane Eyre, and the ghost itself, I'm thinking, I'm thinking of like nostalgic childhood urban legends that would be spread in the playground, but I'm also thinking like the ghost and like the uninvited, there's like all this speculation about what to do with it. It feels like going through it again, it's a real homage to all these different things that clearly have influenced Del Toro to that point in his career and further on in his career too. You can pick up on literary allusions and classic Hollywood in his later films. Over time, it's grown on me, but in the grand scheme of things, I think I lean towards later Del Toro still as a preference.
Yeah, I would agree. When I saw the movie for the first time, not quite when it came out, maybe a few years later, I didn't think it was scary. Maybe I was expecting it to be this really chilling ghost story, when in fact it's more subtle in the way that the horror of the ghost is supposed to make you feel, or what it's supposed to evoke. At the time, I probably knew next to nothing about the Spanish Civil War. I still don't know a ton, but I know more than I did at the time. All of that background, the cinematography too, as you mentioned, or the just kind of the way that they create the mood, and a lot of those evening shots early when they're kind of creeping through the orphanage and the use of shadows. It is creepy in a different way. The movie that I thought of, just because I had watched it not long ago, and actually I just saw on Wikipedia that Del Toro has his list of favorite
Mm.
films, and one of them is Nosferatu, the original from 1922. And I feel like it has some images of that, when with the use of the shadows on the staircases, which is very much back when there was a silent film, and that's the kind of way they had to evoke emotion. It makes perfect sense to me that that's what he likes and what he makes.
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned Nosferatu, I'm already thinking of the iconic shot of Count Orlok going up the staircase, silhouette on the wall, claws out. I
Mm-hmm.
know Devil's Backbone doesn't necessarily recreate shots like that, but as you mentioned, the shadows, there are some like great use of shadows in this film. And there's almost like this sense of the shadows and some practical makeup use ends up creating this sort of ghostly impression with Santi, the ghost boy, the one who sighs.
Yeah.
Rewatching it, I didn't remember this from previous watches, but I'm sure a lot of it is painted onto him to make him look more translucent, like the skeletal, his bones being painted on his shirt, I think down on his leg. It might be CGI, but I'm looking at it, I'm like, that looks like there's some practical makeup work going on here to give this impression of translucency on the body. I think that with the mix of shadows to hide where there might be budgetary limits, I just think very
Yeah.
clever.
Yeah, only $4.5 million budget. Imagine some of that was using practical effects on him. Because just very briefly before we talk about it more, I mean, anyone who definitely we're going to obviously talk about spoilers in the film, but the general plot of the movie takes place in 1939 Spain, the final year of the Spanish Civil War, and the primary kind of protagonist child, his name is Carlos, an orphan, and he's brought to this new orphanage. They don't say it outright, but his father has died and they're putting him here. And the people who are taking care of this orphanage, the sort of the caretakers, they have Carmen, the kind of the administrator, and then you have Dr. Caceres, who's the doctor. They're aiding the leftist or Republican loyalist side during the Spanish Civil War. They're hiding these children. They have gold used to fund and aid the resistance within the leftist organizations. And kind of what we see from the very opening kind of part is that there is someone has died, a boy, and seems to be haunting or asking what is a ghost, through the voiceover. And it's kind of this very chilling and haunting credits scene with the boy seemingly going into water, and it's very kind of chilling as I watch it again. And so really the whole film traces the uncovering of what the ghost is and what will happen to all of the children at the orphanage. It's somewhat sad as we might go through it, as we discussed. If anyone who's familiar with the movie Pan's Labyrinth, which also takes place during the Spanish Civil War, as well as the film Cronos, you kind of get from all the different characters and the main pieces. There aren't that many. There's some of the other children as well. But I think all of the different characters exemplify different causes or people or groups during the Spanish Civil War. We can talk about some of the individual ones. I'm wondering if you saw some of that in them. And I guess just in general, what you of the usage of the Spanish Civil War. It's a theme that Del Toro uses regularly in a lot of his films and other wars, and the Pinocchio takes
Mm.
Italy, of course, and others as well. So it's a good way to use as a backdrop, just because the cruelty of war is a good theme or use for horror. Maybe this movie isn't a true horror film. You could say it's a ghost story, but horror is a horror in of itself. So I've been kind of mumbling on, so feel free to.
As you were saying about the Spanish Civil War as a backdrop, it's a great backdrop. It puts us in a distinct period setting. There's this dreadful thing going on in distance. It gives us a reason to bring characters to the orphanage. I like that it's not just the backdrop. When I saw it recently, there was sort of this sense of Del Toro clearly sympathizes with the resistance, with people fighting against fascism and stuff. And you get that sense with the orphanage, how they're portrayed as, although they're allies to the leftist cause, supply them with bits of gold and stuff to help fund them. You get this sense that, especially with the children, there's this gradual solidarity and unity, partly as a communal thing, as the kids gradually warm to Carlos. And then you also get the sense of, with this underlying mystery, the supernatural mystery of what does Santi the ghost want, and they gradually team up to resolve that. And then you also have Jacinto, who's the caretaker, gradually revealing his true motives of wanting to steal the gold from the orphanage for himself. There's this unity amongst the children in challenging and disrupting his plans. Del Toro's reframing this conflict of the Spanish Civil War on a much smaller scale within the orphanage, where the children resemble the resistance fighters, and Jacinto resembles the selfishness and the malevolence of fascism. And it's obviously we sympathize and root for the children, and I think there's a similar, you can kind of see that, I suppose, as you mentioned, in some of his later works, like Pan's Labyrinth with the Spanish Civil War, or Pinocchio with the resistance against Mussolini. There's a great song where he's mocking Mussolini to his face,
Oh
when he's
yes, yes, that
performing on
seems
the
great.
road. I'm also thinking of The Shape of Water, because although that's not got the same political backdrop as Civil War or fascism, you still have like the resistance of the caretaker who falls in love with the fish monster. And then you've also got the fascistic edge of Michael Shannon's character. I feel like there's that similar dynamic of resistance versus fascism in there too. It seems to be something that does thread through Del Toro's films, where the sympathy does lie with the resistance.
He definitely does that a lot. A lot of people would probably say that Pan's Labyrinth is a better film, or they like it more than Devil's Backbone with a similar Civil War backdrop. What I kind of like about this is that it's a little more subtle, whereas in Pan's Labyrinth, you actively are seeing, one of the main characters actively fighting a captain as there's more actual war being happening. And the only real moment in this where there's direct conflict amongst sort of the leftist cause and the fascists is when you see later some of them are caught by the fascists and they're all executed in the town that's nearby while the doctor is watching. But I like the subtlety in using, as you're saying, of the children as kind of the banding together as a resistance. Dr. Casares, the orphanage doctor, and Carmen also have an interesting relationship where you find that Carmen's husband has been killed, presumably. Dr. Casares is in love with her, both subtly and not so subtly. I think it's very clear. And later in the film, Dr. Casares also befriends Carlos, the new child in the orphanage. He tells them about, the describing the actual name of the film, The Devil's
Yeah,
Backbone, being this fetus that's not quite fully developed, and they store them in these little jars with making
yeah,
that
different.
when he drinks the shot of it. He specifically talks about being kind of impotent, and they use this rum in the town to sell as a cure for that. It seemed clear he himself is impotent and can't, perform, whether it's for Carmen or just maybe there is also a metaphor there for the resistance. He watches all of those people in the town executed and shivering in fright and can't really do anything. And it seems to me that there's also this notion that as much as the resistance wants to stop fascism, there's some impotence to their cause, perhaps, or maybe even there's only so much that this small orphanage can do, although we do realize at the end that they are able to band together and accomplish something very impressive. But I think there's also that subtlety there too.
Definitely. Thinking of that scene, Carlos comes to him talking about Santi the ghost, wondering if there's ghosts in the orphanage, and he starts pouring that awful rum, whatever it is, into a glass, and it says something like, if you believe in ghosts, you should also believe this will help you and you should drink it. When Carlos leaves and the doctor drinks it, I also read that scene as like the Doctor is superstitious on some level. You know, he's maybe he knows there's a ghost, or maybe he believes that things don't just end at death. I'm not sure exactly what the intention was, but I got a more, I think I got a supernatural superstition reading from that scene as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. It does seem. I'm trying to remember referencing Pan's Labyrinth, given some of the
Mm.
similarities. In that, it's kind of the opposite, where only the little girl believes in the mystery and fantasy, ghosts and fairies, but everyone else is kind of telling her that that's nonsense. Her mother and everyone, the other few people that she encounters. Whereas in this, there seems to be like this superstition that does carry through, the people, and especially living in this remote town. They say it takes all night to walk to
Yeah.
the closest town, and they're in the orphanage. This is a good time to briefly talk about the setting of the orphanage. We mentioned some of the shadows and how they filmed it, but the set and the usage of they kind of walk in from this empty landscape into this seemingly very giant structure, and it's just very cool. And then one thing I forgot to mention that happens very early is that they show bombs, and one of them had landed in the center of the orphanage courtyard, and it's just stuck in the ground. And we learn later kind of how it happened, and one of the boys being there as it had happened. I'm curious what you think about the setting of the orphanage and what that bomb might symbolize within it.
One thing I appreciated with the Devil's Backbone is it manages to get the oppressive heat and humidity without everything looking orange. It actually looks really
Mm.
beautiful, like this sand and the bright contrast of the blue. I I'm always anything desert related. I'm now thinking Blood Meridian because I literally reread it like where was it? Last month, this month, whenever I reread Blood Meridian, and there's these great expanses of description of the desert and the landscape, how oppressive the heat is, and the threat of walking long distances to the next town. As soon as one of the characters said it takes all day or all night to get to the nearest town, I'm thinking, oh my, they are that far removed from anywhere else. You get a real sense of scale without ever fully leaving the orphanage. It just gives them a good reason why the children don't. Well, I think we learn early on some of the children try to escape when
Mm-hmm.
Carlos is being shown around, but most of them realize there's not much chance in just running away because it's so far, you'll get lost or the heat's going to get you. And I noticed as well, before we get to the orphanage, I think there's like dotted around the desert, there's like these, maybe they were exploded bombs. I don't know if you saw that. There's like, maybe like if bombs have dropped before, there's like holes with scraps of shrapnel and metal in. I'm sure there is. It feels like, I don't know if there's a significance why those have detonated, and then the bomb in the orphanage, what would make the orphanage special specifically? The bomb in the orphanage, initially, I was thinking, because it had been a while since I last saw it, so I was thinking, well, that's a setup for an explosion. You would expect an explosion. I think at one point, Jaime says you can hear it ticking, and that's its heart. And I'm thinking, anything with ticking bombs, I'm thinking of that whole Hitchcock thing of
Oh
bomb
yeah.
under the table, conversation above, it, the suspense is on us, we're sort of expecting it, and it should be an inevitability, but I don't believe it actually blows up. I'm thinking about it, I I don't fully know what to say about that. There's the sense of the heart of the orphanage. Even rewatching it, I was thinking, what is the significance of the bomb? I'm scratching my head a
Yeah.
little, I suppose.
Well, it's interesting. I hadn't considered that the Hitchcock, you expect something to happen. And even later in the last third of the film, when the explosion
Mm,
happens, you almost expect, okay, that's just going to blow everything
yeah.
up. And I think at one point they mentioned that soldiers had come and checked it, and it,
Yeah.
wasn't going to blow up. But then that's almost like a saying like, oh, of course it actually is going. One thing I was thinking is that if the orphanage is a symbol of resistance from leftist causes, it could be where you can bomb them and shoot at them, but they're not actually, you can't defeat them. You can't defeat the heart of the people in some way. You mentioned the heart.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it's, I suppose
Yeah,
only,
that
I didn't see anything about it. I mean, people's theories, of course, but I didn't see him. He's not.
that attitude of you can't defeat the people. You see the bombs. If they are bombs in the other parts of the desert where they've exploded, they seem to explode elsewhere, but not here. And that's because this is an irrepressible force that resides in the orphanage of unity and community. I like that interpretation. I will be viewing it from that lens now.
Yeah, it seems like it would make sense that way, especially as we learn another thing. Jumping around a little bit, maybe we should talk about the ghosts, which we talked about a little bit. And the beginning, the kind of the one of the opening things is what is a ghost, and they kind of, it's the voiceover of Dr. Casares kind of talking about what it means, and he also ends up, in like a good bookend closure is then talking at the end as before the credits go. But we learn about the boy. We don't know what happened to him until about the last third of the movie, when we learn that Jacinto, is that how you
I thought Jacinto.
Jacinto, yeah, Jacinto. We learn later that he had, accidentally, although given his other things, had killed the boy, or at least he had do anything to save him. So I guess you could say he accidentally hurts him, and then doesn't do anything to. You could have brought him to Casares, Dr. Casares, and maybe healed him, but then he drops him into the liquid, or this pool that's in the basement of the orphanage, and we kind of get a sense of kind of what that ghost mean and who he's haunting. And it doesn't seem like, I mean, initially you see Carlos seeing the ghost and being scared of him and worrying that he's going to hurt him. But as we learn throughout the film, Carlos becomes no longer actually fearful of him. He realizes that he's not there to necessarily hurt him, and he needs to maybe understand why he had died or what had happened to him, and maybe who he actually is trying to get revenge. And I'm wondering what you think about the ghost's kind of trajectory. I do really like how the boys in the orphanage tend eventually come to terms that he's not there to hurt them, is the typical reading of a ghost.
I suppose when the narration's asking what is a ghost, we come to expect literal white sheets, hauntings, poltergeists, and things like that. When, as you said, there's a turn for the characters where they realise Santi isn't there to hurt them, even though his warnings of, I think he says something like, most of you will die, it's quite frightening. It's like ominous. It's not due to Santi's own decision. It's not due to the fault of the ghost that children die here. Thinking about the whole question of what is a ghost, it's a double meaning, isn't it? It's not just the literal expectation of what we expect a spirit to be malicious or haunted or leftover business unresolved, whatever. But I think the secondary meaning of the ghost could be like a karmic punishment or comeuppance, like the ghost of Jacinto's past action of leaving Santi. Sorry, I don't know why I forgot the name. So talking about comeuppance, you could see the ghost, secondary meaning of ghost being this sort of reminder of Jacinto's past action in leaving Santi for dead, coming back to haunt him, rather than necessarily a literal ghost haunting him. The previous action and consequence would be what haunts him and results in Jacinto drowning in the pool in the end. That's a ghost of sorts, an abstract meaning of ghost. I feel maybe there's other double meanings of ghost in the film as well. When you're thinking about the head mistress and her dead husband, it's not that his ghost is necessarily haunting the orphanage, but there's clearly a ghost of him haunting her in a way. Maybe I'm stretching a bit, but I feel like there's probably other examples where it's haunted pasts coming back for them. I think there's probably an intended double meaning that's threaded through other parts of the film too that I may be missing out on.
Well, also Jacinto, when you later see the cruelty and his greed and what he wants to do, but then you also have the moment where he's looking at the pictures from his
Yeah.
childhood, a life that he never was able to have. Like
Mm.
he seemed like fairly, I don't want to say rich, but decently well off.
Mm.
He had a family and went on vacations clearly, and now he's was stuck in the orphanage when his parents died for, I think he said, for 15 years, and he
Mm.
comes back presumably just to steal the gold, not to help people. And I think also Dr. Caceres is kind of haunted by his inability to, like, he can't have the woman he
Yeah.
loves. I think there's a lot of them are very haunted. And just, I think one of the notes I put as far as just the idea of war is also just a haunting thing for anyone. Have to live through this civil war and all these people, especially in Spain. After the Spanish Civil War, I think we discussed this. One of my guests discussed this in our Pan's Labyrinth episode. Is there was actually a law passed where they weren't allowed to even talk about the Civil War in Spain
Oh,
after it happened for many years. Going to talk about
yeah.
this at all. And I think it was kind of a thing that probably haunts all of these people and will for generations, especially the children who are forced to live there. That was another thing that I actually wanted to mention. I had recently watched or rewatched Ivan's Childhood and discussed it. And that movie talks about kind of like the innocence of children during World War II. And I think there's a lot of that in this as well. These poor children are they're trying to be taught by Carmen. She's trying to give them education, make them have as normal quote unquote life as they can in this, considering the circumstances. And it's hard to do in this remote place with an undetonated bomb. They don't have very much food. They're very
Mm.
malnourished. It's a very cruel movie. But one thing you mentioned earlier about the scene not having that orange, I think it kind of gives the film a little more life,
Yeah.
as well as giving them more life than you normally would see. Sometimes it's just washed out, and you kind of feel like the little bit of hope as you're watching it.
Yeah, you get these glimpses into the childhood that they should be having, like spreading urban legends about haunted kitchen, or no, what is it is that they say something like no one's ever come back from filling the jug of water at night. And it's like these are the sort of things you tell when as a kid you're telling other kids, or kids are telling you to try and freak you out. In a way, it's part of the fun and the bonding. And I love that there's these tender moments where, okay, yes, Jaime's not as kind to Carlos at the beginning. He's a bit of a bully, but he's gradually revealed to not really be a bully at heart. There's this sense of gradual building of friendships. The childhood they deserve to be having, away from war as the backdrop, or cruel groundskeepers who don't care if children die.
Yeah, I mean, they're also playing with, like, Carlos had brought a bunch of little toys. He has the little, like, hopping,
Yeah.
a normal life as they can. The reason that Santi ends up dying is they're literally finding slugs
Mm.
and just in the wrong place at the wrong time,
Mm.
and it leads to many deaths, including the caretaker, most of the children, and the adults. It's kind of cruel, but I do like that they give the children kind of a life beyond that. One other thing that I found interesting, and the only time they show the kids learning in the classroom,
Mm.
the teacher Carmen is showing them a picture of a woolly mammoth, and kind of how in the prehistoric times, for the animals were very large, technology was limited, yet they were able to kill woolly mammoths and scrounge for food because they were able to act in sort of this collective, not just an individual. And I think that's both a metaphor for the cause, the leftists being like they can't try and do things on their own. They need to work collectively. And then also, as we see in one of the last scenes where they kill
Yeah,
Jacinto,
Jacinto. That's just how
Jacinto. I
I've been
keep saying it.
pronounced it. It might be wrong as well.
Yeah, I'm very bad. I always butcher it. So they murder him later with pointed sticks,
Mm,
literally, as they would have used to take down a woolly mammoth. So it was a nice kind of,
yeah, and that wasn't even a connection I picked up on my rewatch. And from a writing perspective, as you write in scripts or books or whatever, things aren't placed there by coincidence. So it's an intentional connection that we should be drawing from the woolly mammoth, because they've got the spears, and then the kids, they've got the spears. It's, as you say, a united collective against a common enemy, or a common cause. It made me think. Actually, now we're talking about it, I rewatched Seven Samurai recently, and I suppose that's got a very similar message where you have the samurai uniting the village against the bandits. There's literally a point
Mm.
where one of the characters says something like, "We are stronger as a unit rather than as an individual." And it's like, yeah, you get that within Devil's Backbone as well. I suppose thinking about it, there's one boy when they're trying to make a plan and they're all hiding in the closet, and one boy is slid out through the window and he breaks his ankle. And then it's the ghost who comes back, Santi, to unlock the. No, it's not actually. It's Doctor.
Cause yeah,
Yeah, he
Casares, yeah.
comes back to unlock the door, I think. And it would be quite easy for differently minded people to think this boy who's just broken his ankle no longer helpful for us. He'll slow us down, leave him behind. And they don't. I don't remember them by the end when they're all leaving the orphanage. You still have the
Oh,
boy.
he's like hopping.
Yeah, it's like they're not leaving anyone behind here. You know, as you say, it's that strength in unity.
I don't remember that boy. There's the one kid who doesn't talk, I think is Owl. He's the one who's injured pretty
Mm,
badly. That scene is very, they break the glass in the room they've been locked in and they're sharpening the sticks that they're getting to use. It's a great moment where they're all working together and and several times they say they're not afraid of him
mm,
anymore. The woman who is Jacinto's
yeah,
girlfriend ends up later killing her, to for just because it just seems like it just added cruelty because I think he asked her to apologize and she won't do it. She says of
mm,
him and he has to show this level of strength and his character generally, which I think symbolizes that greed and the fascist side of willing to do and kill whoever is in your way, steal the gold, do it all for himself. And he ends up dying, which is another thing I hadn't considered. I think I saw someone write this is the liquid that the little fetuses are in
mm,
with the devil's backbone. It's also meant to be similar to the liquid that's in the basement.
yeah.
But I wasn't. What do you make of them? The comparison. I was trying to think about how they would compare because they're kind of different, but they look the same. They
Yeah,
all.
when I was watching it from a literal perspective, I was thinking, what even is the purpose of this pool? If it's water for cleaning or drinking, you wouldn't want it all rust coloured and orange. That can't be
Yeah.
safe. But if it was a septic tank, it wouldn't be that clear, I guess. So I was wondering what the pool significance was in the literal sense, what purpose it served in the orphanage. But in terms of like connection, or as you mention it now, like the babies and jars and stuff, I suppose Santi's body's still down there, isn't it? And then you think
Mm.
Jacinto gets left there. The babies, I suppose they're going to be preserved there for however long the orphanage remains standing. I suppose maybe in a way you could see those babies in jars as foreshadowing for the fate of Jacinto.
Yeah. Well, also the baby like the fetuses in jars he mentions that they're not fully developed and I guess obviously they'll never become adults, kids, anything. And I guess you could also say that the Santi will also never
Mm,
get to grow up and Jacinto suffers probably a worse fate is he wanted to have a farm and live and just have a normal life but he chose this way of getting to what it was, and he
mm,
ultimately dies. Another thing that is interesting is he was trying to steal the gold the entire time.
mm,
He's sleeping with Carmen to steal her keys, to try different ones, to open the safe. Eventually, he finds the gold is inside her prosthetic leg, which
mm.
brings back some of the lines she said, like, "Oh, my leg is feeling extra heavy
Yeah.
today," and these things that you didn't think of until you uncover
Mm,
that fact. And so he puts the gold into a little pouch on his belt, and it ends up partly what ends up killing him. You see Santi's ghost pulling him in and drowning him. But the way I interpret it this time is that it's actually the gold and his greed that is what's weighing him
mm.
down. The kids don't even care to get the gold. Like they could have jumped in, they could have grabbed the gold if they wanted and left with it, but that's not what they're interested in. They're interested in surviving, living, and not doing the thing that's got him
Yeah,
killed, presumably.
and I like this angle of the gold weighing him down as well, because it's it agreed, it contributes to his final fate. I suppose it's again a bit like a cautionary warning, isn't it? Not to let your temptations get the better of you. I suppose if we view in fascism synonymous with selfishness, greed here, it's like not allowing that corruption to get the better of you. I suppose it's a bit like if you view the gold weighing him down and the greed weighing him down, there's a bit of an Aesop fable angle
Mm.
there. This scene alone is it's a warning for us not maybe literally fall into pools of water with gold in our own pockets, but to not fall down the same rabbit hole Jacinto does.
Reminded me, I was just thinking about this as like thinking of all the little kind of things that are included, like the woolly mammoths for a reason. One of the comics or the books that Carlos brings is the Count of Monte Cristo, which I haven't read since, I don't know, probably 25 years. So I remember it in vaguely, but I'm wondering, have you read it or do
No,
you
I
aware of the
haven't.
plot
I
at
haven't
all?
read it. I'm not familiar with it. I want to read it. It's on
Yeah,
the reading list.
it's because it's interesting. I was just looking at the summary and I was trying to think if there is something in that they were trying to also
Mm,
forward. I feel like I would have had to probably fully read the whole thing to see it,
yeah,
but it does seem like there's a treasure that's being discovered and someone's trying to find it and become wealthy because of it. And maybe it's a similar thing where Jacinto is trying to come back and get revenge, not revenge necessarily, but he's avenging his lost
yeah.
life to come back and become rich. But yeah, that's maybe I'll remove that because I don't actually know enough about the book to speak to what they were going for. But I have to think there was something they were
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to include there. And actually, it reminds me of another thing that one of the boys wanted to also become like a comic book
Mm,
writer. And I think it's also just they each have a dream of what they want to do. That brings me to the ending where a few of the boys, I think it's five of them, have survived, including the boy with the broken ankle who's hobbling along. They're going to presumably walk from where they
yeah.
are those miles and miles to get to some kind of salvation. And it could be a very grim ending in the sense that there's most of the people
Mm,
have died. They don't have any of the gold is lost. The orphanage is lost. We kind of know what's going to happen, but you do have kind of like the glimmer of hope that these children are going to, persist
yeah.
on regardless of the circumstances. They don't, it doesn't, the odds don't matter to them. They are going to be the next generation of children in Spain, and they're going to have to carry on presumably the ideas and the concepts of the left side as opposed to the fascists who
Mm.
have attempted to destroy them.
I suppose in the next generation, Spain, as they're leaving the orphanage for some uncertain new destination, they're entering new horizons, aren't they? In a very literal sense. It could be bleak. Realistically, sadly, some of them probably would die on the way there, but I think some of them would also be persistent enough to make it to wherever they're trying to go, the next town over. I suppose we'd try and speculate about a story that continues on from the Devil's Backbone.
It's interesting. You want to have hope for the kids,
Mm.
but you also realize the bleakness of their
And
situation in
I
general.
suppose wanting hope for the kids, it's I suppose we could circle it back to the childhood they deserve. If they get out of this alive, let these kids, be, go to school, be safe, play. They shouldn't have to deal with people like Jacinto or bombs raining over their heads. They should be allowed to just be kids.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. I mean, you'd hope they would get somewhere. Someone would not necessarily know the circumstances of what's happened. They don't know that they were being harbored by
Mm,
the leftists. This is the waning end of the Civil War, and presumably afterwards they might have a chance to have a normal enough life for kids, after a war because it's ravaged,
mm.
the country. But were there any other notes or themes or things that we didn't get to that you had thought of or had noted?
Uh, if someone was new to Guillermo del Toro's output of films. I would say if they were about to dive into Devil's Backbone, they should be prepared. It's a subtler output than, say, Pan's Labyrinth. I think you've mentioned that already. Here you get the children speculating or things left unsaid, and you're kind of left to imagine some of the gaps. And in comparison, where something like Pan's Labyrinth, where the girl's fantasies we see spring to life and everything, it's like it's you get nothing like that. And I think if people were going to watch The Devil's Backbone for the first time and expect maybe like the extravagance, the fantasy, and everything that we've come to love Del Toro for, to maybe expect something more restrained. But I think there's also, you can see where he's getting that sense of, because before this it was Cronos and then the Faculty, I think.
I think Mimic might have been his second.
I'm getting films confused with different filmmakers.
Who
You're
did
probably right,
Faculty,
actually. Mimic, the Faculty.
Robert Rodriguez.
I like Cronos, but The Devil's Backbone feels more confidently Del Toro, like he's really stepping into the voice that we've come to expect from him. We expect conventions of horror, but more dramatized or more poetic, more poignantly told, with a soft spot for childhood sentimentality told in a way where it becomes disrupted by violence or shocking events. You get a sense with this one where Del Toro's really coming into himself as a filmmaker. If you're new to Del Toro, this might be the one to start with first. So then you get a sense of he isn't just the extravagance, he's the small scale drama, characterization, all these wonderful little subtleties that not that his later films lack, but not quite as such the focus, I suppose. Yeah, I'd say if people wanted to dive into his work and see where he started out, this would be a good spot.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if you hadn't seen any of his films ever, or even if you saw some of the, I guess you could talk about some of the more like commercial ones, Pacific Rim
Yeah.
and the non, they're different types of films for
Yeah.
him. Devil's Backbone is a good starting point because almost going backwards from the Pan's Labyrinth to this one, you might, like you're saying, you're going to expect it to be similar, but it's not quite. It's more subtle. And I think that's what makes it so interesting is that a lot of the themes in Pan's Labyrinth I think are a little bit maybe more, I don't want to say obvious, but they're a little bit more
overt, a
what's
bit
the word?
more.
Where in this a little bit more subtle, and I think that what makes it a good one. And actually, something that I heard recently about him is that apparently he wants to eventually move to only making animated films like Pinocchio,
Ah,
which I find interesting, which is both sad and also cool because that movie is
I
and
really
hence the
enjoyed
stop
it.
motion pretty amazing, but I'm wondering what kind of things he'll do in the future. But yeah, I also like Cronos. That was one of the I think it was actually the first movie I saw of his.
It's been a long time
Or
since I've
no,
seen that one.
actually, I think I saw Pan's Labyrinth first, and I need to watch more of them. And I think I watched Kronos and didn't appreciate it that much, and then watched it maybe last year around this time. It's definitely even more
Yeah.
subtle. Some of the things
It,
it's very interesting. But yeah,
it's one I need to rewatch. I haven't seen it in years. I remember vague elements of it, something to do with immortality.
yeah. So I won't ruin it for you or for anyone who hasn't seen it. It's loosely kind of vampiric, but not in the same way as other vampire films might be. But yes, the need to live a longer life, and I think it has Ron
Yes.
Perlman, who's been in a bunch of his movies, and he's very good in it. I'm trying to think of the main actor, Federico.
Oh, yeah, he's in
Is the
Devil's Backbone as well.
Yes, yeah. That's one thing that Del Toro on his page. It has many actors who have been in numerous ones of his film, which I always like when that's the
Yeah.
case, is they want to keep working with the same director. But yeah, I don't have any other notes on the film. Just I would say, it's definitely a one to. I would highly recommend checking it out for anyone who hasn't seen it. I know at the beginning we mentioned some Halloween movies you've seen recently. Are there any ones you're looking forward to watching or revisiting that maybe other listeners might want to
That's a
check
good
out?
question, because as we get deeper into autumn, towards October, I kind of marathon horror films to get myself into the Halloweeny mood. And because of my channel, each October it's dedicated to horror, so I'm sort of looking forward to some of the horror films I'll be introduced to from my Patreons. Off the top of my head, I'm quite excited about rewatching some, like I mentioned Donnie Barbar earlier, but I'm quite excited on rewatching some other like classic Japanese horror films. Like I've always liked Kuroniko, which is about two women who are sexually assaulted by a group of samurai. In death, they seek revenge and take the form of black cats. I have very vague memories of it, other than it looking gorgeous and it being really quite disturbing. And this is a film from, I think, the early 60s. So I'm very excited to rewatch that one. Again, another one I might be mispronouncing, but Kwaidan by Masaki Kobayashi, which is this grand anthology of beautiful ghost stories inspired
Oh,
by Japanese folklore. I've seen it a few times, but it's been years since I last watched it, and I've only really got vague memories of certain ghosts in it. I specifically remember a story about a monk who is covered in an incantation all over his face, and he has to play, I'm not sure what the name of the instrument is, he has to play an instrument for these spirits that won't leave the shrine. I remember it's fantastic.
I just added it to my list, and that's actually the cover photo is
Yeah,
the face with
it's
the
an eerie
that on
picture.
there.
If you knew nothing about it, you'd be like, this looks very cursed, you know?
Yeah, so for me, because you mentioned Japanese horrors, one that I watched last year that I don't know if I'm going to rewatch it just yet because it definitely left some impressions on me is the film
Oh,
Audition.
yeah.
Mostly because of things related to one of those. The one thing that really unsettles me the most, and the other one that I watched, I think I watched it twice last year because it was just incredible. And I think I'm going to have to watch it again. This is the film Cure,
Oh,
which is a really good one out there that maybe at some point I'll have to do an episode on.
First time I
It
saw it, I
is.
couldn't get my head round it. And then the second time I saw it, I think earlier this year, because I did a video on it that sadly got taken down. And rewatching it, I feel like I had a better understanding of how it plays with hypnotism and stuff like that. It's not really a film you can ever quite fully solve it, you know?
Yeah, the first time I watched it, I feel like I didn't understand it. That's why I watched it
Yeah.
twice in a short time. Like, I need to rewatch that
Yeah.
again. Then the other films, some that I haven't watched nearly enough, mostly because I'm slightly new to them. I watched the Gaspar Noé
Oh,
film
God.
Climax, and
Yeah.
now I want to watch all of the first, a lot of the French Extreme
Yeah.
kind of movies, just because I never really got into them, and so now I want to watch that. I want to
Climax
watch.
is one of his best. Vortex is his most recent one, but that is quite far removed from the films he's better known for. Climax is thrilling. I love that there's these the way the characters kind of when they're having mental breakdowns and they're sort of incorporating dance into it too. It's like
Yeah, oh,
incredible. And then so
I was blown away by the acting performance across the board.
if you're looking
Pretty
for
stunning.
other new French extremity films, one of the big ones is Martyrs. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, it's on my it's on my
Oh my
list.
god. I won't spoil it, but the first time I saw it, I was jaw dropped. I was shocked that you can get away with showing stuff like that. It's heavy.
Okay, I just from like I don't I try and go in. I saw the like just the brief description, but I try not to watch like the
Yeah,
trailer
yeah.
even. Not that especially ones where it's very that I want to watch is
Oh
Inside, and
yeah.
then a bunch of I just the guys on concessions
Inside's a
recommended.
Chris film, really. It's
Yeah, so maybe I'll save that
yeah.
for Chris.
I,
Yeah,
I watched
but yeah,
like last year for Christmas on my channel. I completely forgot that Beatrice Dahl's in it, and she's just a powerhouse of being filthy and nasty. She's incredible.
yeah. I'm looking. I think I'll probably do a little. This is maybe not the typical Halloween kind of
Yeah,
marathon film, but I think that's the way I'm going to go this year. Some of these ones that I just
they're
have not
good
had a chance to
picks.
see, but yeah. So, yeah. So there's lots of for listeners. There's lots of films, and you can follow your channel, your YouTube channel, and then you also have a letterbox, which I'll link
Thank
to,
you.
and my own letterbox to find some of these films that maybe aren't talked about as much when it comes to Halloween season. But Olivia, it's been a pleasure having
Thank
you on.
you.
Thank you so much for
This has
being here.
been a lot of fun, and if you ever wanted to talk about another film in the future, I'd be happy to join.
Yes, well, we should maybe do, after I watch a bunch of these French films, extremity films, we should maybe, whether it's on a single one of them or talking about a few of them. Sometimes I like to do like a double feature from two directors that have similar kind of, things about them. So we definitely should. Once I immerse myself this September and October with just tons of body horror
Yeah.
films, and maybe we'll have to come back and do one.
Yeah, that sounds fun. I'm up for that.
Awesome. You can follow Olivia's channel on all platforms, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.